Okay.
We are live, but kind of not really because we're recording intentionally.
So happy to do this.
Me
exciting.
too.
Trying to make sure that I'm like at a good angle. I feel comfortable.
I know.
My body,
I'm like my good side is.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because I've attended retreats that like are days and days long, and you're sitting on a mat and you're sitting like this, and by the end of the week my hips are just screaming at me.
Yeah.
So if I fidget around, it's because my hips get tight and I just have to
That's fine.
find a good
You
spot.
fidget all you like.
Okay.
I actually have developed some sciatic stuff from sitting on yoga blocks.
Yeah.
So that is not my favorite.
Right.
But let's introduce you. I'm here with Nicole Green, who is amazing. I'm so happy that she's come today.
Yeah.
And we put on robes because it's a Saturday morning for us. And we just brewed some coffee. So a little bit of a different vibe when I was drinking a glass of wine, not in a robe for our last home interview. And who are you? What do you do?
So I'm just going to be like super transparent. I'll just kind of give you a quick like path for me. So I started this, I call it a journey, about 8 years ago. And my first step was yoga teacher training. And I was trained specifically through a Christian yoga thing and did the master certification and everything. And it was really, really amazing. I have no regrets about it. I learned a ton. And it was the first step on my journey. So my background is like really, really fundamentalist Christian. And so it was kind of what I needed to get myself into this world safely. And that was my journey. So then I went on to do spiritual director training, which was really deep and amazing. And then I got into self-help and life coaching and mindset coaching and all of that. Totally needed part of the path. And then eventually discovered Tantra through the sex, love, and relationship coach training that Layla Martin does. So that's kind of how I got here. And so I coach mostly local people. I personally like to work in person. I like to see people. I like to be able to, like reach out and be like, oh, I got you. And so we've been building a house for the last 9 months. So I haven't done a ton of coaching. I've been diving deeper into my own journey. And I just know that it was so part of what is needed because my transmission, like the way that I show up in the world, feels so much different over the last year. Oh, the journey's been amazing. And so my house will be finished in a month and I will be once again taking new clients. But I coach people around basic life coach stuff. But my favorite is to do sex, love, and relationship coaching. It lights me up and I love it.
That's so cool. It's not every day that you get to meet a sex coach with a strong Christian background.
Yeah.
So Nicole and I have been acquainted for probably a couple years now. And you're local to Baton Rouge. So I get that desire to work closely one-on-one with people because a lot of my folks are not local. A lot of my folks are from all over the US and even Canada. So there is an element of just being able to be in proximity with people that's so healing.
Yeah.
So that's really rad. And how cool to get to work with a teacher like Layla Martin, who's amazing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
We've had some interesting overlap in just being able to share our stories together because part of my background is I suffered a major, major trauma while I was married that was sexually based. And that really shut me down for quite a while. And I've shared publicly that I've been celibate for a couple years while I've worked on myself and trying to form that inner relationship.
Yeah.
And so sex has been a huge area of coming into my understanding of who I am and tapping into that as a creative force. And
Yes.
and even we've done pole dance parties together. I teach pole dance.
Yeah.
And so it's been also a very cool medium for me to be able to go into a space. And, when you're in dance class, maybe there are some other, usually women, not always women, but mostly women in the studio that are around, and maybe you're watching yourself, but there's not much of an audience. So your sexuality in that context is always just for you. There's no other gaze around.
Yes. Yeah. Which I think is so good, to just heal your own gaze, before, wanting to put it out in the world. I love that. I love that so much. Yeah, I had so many thoughts while you were talking, but I'm going to just let you keep going.
Well, no, I want to hear some of those thoughts.
Okay.
And as always, I do have my question roulette.
Okay, yes. Yeah. Well, one thing that kind of came up for me, I think when people hear, that I'm a sex coach, they think of that in the sense of that I help people be better at sex, or to become better at sex. I remember my 17, well, he's 18 now, but I remember when I very first started coaching, and I told him I'm going to be a sex coach. And he was like, what? Like, he literally thought I was going to be sitting beside people's beds, coaching them to be better. Like a basketball coach. Go. And it was so innocent. He is a very unique, innocent old soul. And so I was like, no, that's not it. And I've found that a lot of people, that's kind of like their quest. They might come to me because they want a better sex life. And that's fine if that's kind of the first step on the journey. But what I've come to realize is that I chose this path because sex is like a portal to the deepest healing that I've ever experienced. I had lots of my own trauma, and sex was this shameful, taboo thing. And once I was like, okay, this is the path I want to take. I was so drawn to it. I feel like I was drawn to it the moment I entered this world. I have started to realize that sex as a path to healing, it's not so much to do with what sex looks like or whether you're good or bad or whatever. It's that you're allowing it to be the medicine, and you're allowing it to heal you on these layers that to me, they're the deepest. They're the most primal. They're just, we come out of the womb with these sexual urges. Babies touch themselves from the earliest age.
Yeah, in the womb.
Yes. And from the beginning, shame in our culture is heaped on that. And so to say, okay, I'm going to take my sexuality, I'm going to heal there. And that is going to actually be what trickles out. I tell my clients all the time, when you become sexually healed and whole, whenever you become sexually empowered, it literally affects everything.
Yeah, well, and I believe that as well, because your sexuality is your creative force. And so what's the creative force? The creative force is God, goddess, whatever, the universe, whatever you happen to believe in.
Right.
And so your own sexuality is the closest that you're going to get to tapping that creator, which is part of the reason why I've decided to take such a long stint of celibacy. I hope it doesn't last too much.
Stick with me and it won't last.
I would like to have a serious relationship in my future when it arrives. But it's all of my study of myself has really put into perspective how sacred sex is. And it's been interesting to see that in dating, where it's like, ooh, I really, no, why would you expect that on the first date? Of course not. And it's so common, and, there's no judgment. You do it when you feel that it's right for you. But for me, knowing that it is so sacred, it's like, ooh, I want to make sure that the energy that I'm giving and the energy that I'm going to receive in return, because that is, it's a sacred energy exchange, if we were to use the acronym. it's just really important, especially as a feminine energy. You know, we have a womb, we have, you know, we're the receiving end of the action.
Yeah.
And you're going to take on. And so what kind of energy are you going to take on? And, you know, it's difficult for men. It's difficult for everyone, but I think it's especially difficult for men because they end up not being as free as we are to express how they're feeling. And I feel like that leads to having just a lot of blocked energy. And so the things that they've experienced that they want to process don't have as easily a pathway out as like, you know, I might be sad and I might call you up and cry for 25 minutes and then it's good.
Right.
You know, that's passed on.
Yeah. Yeah. So one thing I need to say, this is an important piece of this, is that I am married and I've been married for 26 years. This August will be 27 years. And I know. Yeah, I know. I'm like, I wish he was here with me. Eventually he's just now tiptoeing into being open to being public with kind of the work that I do. And he's also, like, we just got home from a training that we did together, that I have no doubt that the future of my coaching, a lot of it will be us holding space for other couples, like in like retreat type settings. But I think it's really important to just mention that I've healed in the container of marriage, which has been, like, it gives me chills to talk about it. It's so profound because it's been hard. Like, it's been super deep. And I've found that all of my shadows have been hidden in sexuality, and his too. Like, it's like our shadows would come out to play, basically. And we've always had a relatively, like, if you're looking at society, a relatively decent sex life. But it's only been in the last year and a half that our sex has become like really intentional and really focused on healing and creating, and like, I can't even describe. But I've gotten to witness how that looks for the masculine, like what it looks like for a man, you know, and of course we all have feminine and masculine within us, but I'm more feminine and he's more masculine, to see how that works, how that functions, and to be able to hold space for his healing, which has been really intense. Like, his has been more recent, and thank God that, like, I have done enough work to be able to hold space for that, because a couple of years ago, I don't think I could have. And now I can. Like, it's an interesting, because he was always there for me whenever I was going through like my deep stuff, my trauma healing and stuff. Like, he was just like, I'm going to be here for you. And he was just this solid masculine, like, rock, which is what I needed him to be. It was perfect, you know? But he never really understood what he was being. I kind of knew, but it's hard to put things like that into language. And so he was just that rock for me. And then I came to like a steady place. Like, I came to this solid place. And now I'm kind of that life raft for him while he is just now going into his own work. And it's so profound, so incredible. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of partnership. I really am. You know, whenever it's good, when both people are conscious, you know, I'm so glad that I have that, and I don't take it for granted, and I don't take it lightly, and I believe it's possible for everyone that wants it. So I can't wait to like.
Thank you. Give me all the blessings. You know, I think it's really cool because at my present point and my present perspective, I know I'm going to enter a relationship. And I think in many ways, the feminine energy is a leader in that. So I kind of, it's kind of like if you've ever played chicken in the pool, where you get up on someone's shoulders, depending on how deep the water is. You get up on, so like, let's say the feminine energy is up on the masculine energy shoulders. And we have the, you know, this isn't part of the chicken game, but we have the headlight. So we're able to see, we have the vision, but the masculine energy is what carries you forward and in which direction. So like we have this radius around us where maybe we
Mhm.
have a circle of space that we're able to see. And then the masculine energy, that forward moving force,
Mhm.
your partner, or, you know, as we come into our wholeness, we also guide ourselves.
Yeah.
But we then pick a pathway.
Mhm.
And I think it's really, it's so cool that you got to do that in marriage. You said 27 years coming
27 years in August. Yes.
up? That's awesome.
Yes. Yeah. And you know, I don't think he basically has given me permission to share anything I feel compelled to share.
Mhm.
So
Aw.
it was probably a little over a year ago that we were married, and at the time, I went straight to Bible college out of high school. And so when we got married, I was always kind of this wild, free spirit as a teenager and child. And then I like recognized that doesn't fit in the mold of Christianity. And so when I was around 18, 19, I like shifted into this, like, I'm going to find a husband and be a submissive wife. And I'm going to do all of these things. And so literally for 20 years, I shut down that, like, the wild feminine or the wild dark feminine kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And huge aspects of you.
Oh my God. Like, it's so crazy that for so many, I know a lot of people in my life, when they, the people that knew me through those years, they probably look at me now and they're like, oh my God, she's changed so much. And they see it as a negative. But it's really, I just came back to myself. Like, I just came back to who I really was. And it's actually who he fell in love with. Like, he got to see that wild part of me in the bedroom. So he knew who I was, And so, but for so many years, I was just like quiet or maybe not quiet, but I bought the whole, like, I need to be a submissive wife to be a good Christian. Like, I want to be this good Christian, godly woman. And so to kind of come into this place of, and what went with that was the patriarchal view of, like, man is over woman and, like, the kids are under the woman. Like, it's like there's like an umbrella thing that's on Pinterest. I've seen
the hierarchy.
Yeah, the hierarchy of people. And it's like, oh, actually, we're all equals. Like, we're all on this journey of equality. And there's like roles that masculinity naturally biologically functions in, and then there's these roles that women or the feminine biologically functions in. And to recognize that, because I've always been the spiritual leader in our relationship, and he just kind of like followed along, but I like would say, oh, I'm being submissive kind of thing, like just to fit that mold that patriarchy created for me. And so what's happened is that I have stepped into my role as the initiatrix, the priestess, the goddess, the woman that he is like, I want to follow that. Like, I want to be a rock for that. Like, I want to be solid for that. And it's like helped him step, like, the thing I most identify with is probably like the Queen, which of course I love the Queen's Code. If y'all haven't read that, it's amazing.
Ooh, I haven't read that, but I'm glad we're getting into archetypes now.
So the Queen's Code is phenomenal. And it's basically like, I recognize that, like, I feel, and I have always felt like I'm a queen, like I would have denounced that earlier on, but especially like I look back at myself, I'm like, heck yes, I've always been that queen. And so have you, so have every one of us. Well, like, he is a king. And for me to be like, yes, I'm a queen, but I won't have anything less than a king, has been this portal for him to like step through and say, yeah, I can be that for you. Like, I can be that. So it's like me saying, you are a king. Like, hell yeah. And I'm sure like we can look throughout history of these powerful queens that like help their men be these like kingly, but there's not a you're over me kind of thing. It's like equality, but functioning in the roles that we were created to, function in.
Right. And I think it's really neat that as the feminine energy, sorry about the dog who's like up in your,
I love the dog.
Up in your grill.
Yeah.
She's really sweet. I like to have her out, and she likes girl time. But I think it's really neat that as the feminine energy comes into health, where we can look at our shadows, and often hidden in the feminine shadow is manipulation. And how do I meet my needs? And get my person to show up with me. And so when that expresses in a manipulative way,
Yeah.
it can look like in Al-Anon and Coda, they talk about the 4 M's: mothering, managing, martyring, and manipulating.
Yes.
And so, we might use guilt trips.
Yeah.
Or crying, or or blame shifting and things like that. Or, you're martyring and you're like, I don't want to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway because I'm trying to egg you into performing in this way. And so I feel like when I see women like you who have stepped up into their full healthy feminine, they're men, assuming that your partner is in it.
Right.
And Mr. Mike, Mr. Mike is in it. I love Mr. Mike. I haven't met him. I love the tales of Mr. Mike, but it's inspiring. And a man does want to step up and be his best self. And I think that it's, you don't need to manipulate or inspire from that place, to use another AA and Al-Anonism. It's attraction, not promotion. I don't need to sell you on something. I can show you what the healing looks like. And should you join me? Wonderful.
Yeah.
In the case of my marriage was 5 years, and it was over from like day one. It was basically like, oh, this isn't going to work. It's a ticking time bomb. He and I had irreparable damage to our trust, all the deal breakers, like it, to stay in that would have just been self-sacrificial. That wasn't my path, and that's not my belief system. So I eventually made my way out of it. But I reflect on what a broken marriage like that could have been if the trust wasn't irreparable.
Right.
And I think it's really inspiring to see women like you who had a good marriage anyway, but then came into their wholeness and were able to heal enough to set a solid foundation that when their masculine energy or their man or whoever had to go through their healing, it didn't rock everything. Yeah. And so I don't think that any relationship is doomed, even if there's a lot of healing work to do. Yeah. But I think often the feminine does need to go on her journey and get stable and solid with her feminine, and then enough of that masculine energy to hold steady as that man rises up.
Right.
And I don't know why I feel like that's the order, but I think that there is an order to that.
I do. And I think that it's, I think if you look, at one point I did some work with Heifer International. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but it's a nonprofit that provides like animals to people in third world countries or in impoverished areas that help them get out of poverty by like producing things they can sell, milk, eggs, stuff like that.
I was going to say, do they want that animal?
But I remember going to a retreat there at their place in, I think it's in Arkansas. It's been a while. But they explained that they give the animals to the women, not to the men, because the women are the ones that make sure their families are okay. And it is the mother, like we're getting into archetypes without even trying to. It's the mother in us that is like, we're going to make sure our kids are okay. We're going to make sure that everything is good. And so I think that naturally we're created to be that, like to be the priestess, like we are. And I know like in cultures throughout, I mean, it's been so hard for me to be able to even talk about this publicly, because it does go against the Christian, the Christian idea, like the fundamentalist idea that like men are the leader. But that just comes from patriarchy. That just comes from men that wanted power. And, I could get into like hours of that conversation, but it's not the way things work. And so naturally women are the leader and the priestess, and eventually like women do tend to help men step into their role of leadership, but it is the way it is. I mean, we can look at all kinds of reasons why, but like if anybody would argue that a woman's a sexually empowered woman does, like, they rule the world, we rule the world, like, my sister-in-law, I don't think she'll watch this, but I have somewhere, I shouldn't have even said that. But her comment is kitty rules, which, you know, they're like just being funny, but like your necklace, that word, like it's that, I mean, a sexually empowered woman rules the world. And the key to this is that women become conscious, because you talked about like that manipulation. I mean, I was the queen of manipulation, and I didn't mean to be. I didn't realize it at the time. But once I started doing my work and healing my trauma and healing sexually, I started to recognize, like, oh my gosh, I have been using this as a tool to manipulate for my entire life. And to say, like, oh, wow, like, that's not empowerment. That's actually like extremely detrimental to everyone, myself especially. And so to heal in a way that, like, recognize, I mean, just this morning, I was telling you, you know, my husband and I had this conversation about something that, like, things didn't go my way. Like, I was expecting something to happen on a house we're building, and they're not. And my mind immediately wants to go into blame mode. And we laugh about it now because we're both conscious enough to recognize that it's absolutely hilarious. But like, I can stub my toe and immediately my mind goes to blaming him. Like, it's so hilarious. And so I just laugh at myself, and we laugh together about it. But I think that is the shadow. That's definitely the shadow of the feminine, or it definitely was mine, to say, well, I did this and it's your fault. Like, this is your problem, and try to make him fix me. And I mean, this is really deep stuff, because I mean, I was depressed for years and years. And I recognized one day, and there's a lot more to it than just this. I was also deconstructing like religious beliefs and stuff. So that was part of it. But one of the things I came to realize is that whenever I had my first son 24 years ago, I had postpartum depression, and I had not had depression before that. And my husband showed up for me in a way that was just indescribable. Like, it didn't matter where he was coming to me when I was depressed. Well, I very unconsciously, I'm not saying like I intentionally did this, but unconsciously, like, anytime I needed attention, I was depressed. And so whenever my eyes were open to that, it was just like, oh my gosh, like, this is crazy. And as soon as I made that connection, I'm not saying I was never depressed anymore, because I had some other things going on, but it completely shifted it for me. And at least it wasn't like, you know, I was doing it over and over, and I could see it. It was like, I just need to be seen. And I could say to him, instead of, hey, I'm depressed, I need you to come home, I could say, hey, I'm feeling a little invisible. Like, can you just give me some extra attention? And that's consciousness, is being completely honest about what you need. Or, I mean, I'm like, hey, I need you to come home and make love to me. Like, I need to feel like super sexy and witnessed. And that's such a beautiful thing, to take the shadow and be like, oh, there's the light. Yeah. The light is truth.
Yeah. And it's beautiful to be able to recognize when you are in your shadow, because I think initially off the bat, you hear about like, ooh, people manipulate each other. And it's like, yeah, like everyone does. And it can feel very shameful to claim that. But as you accept that this is a reality of healing and of growing up into your adult self, that doesn't mean you're 18 and now you're a grown up, but like your actual healed adult self, it becomes more okay to, I think it's helpful to hear other people sharing, and then to use it as a mirror to be like, oh, you know what? They claimed it. I also see that in myself. I can claim it too. And once you have a level of acceptance for it, you become more okay with looking for that pattern. And so there's nothing wrong. Like, we manipulate each other because that is a habitual pattern, because it proved its efficacy. And so there's nothing inherently wrong about it. It's just, once you start to become conscious and you're able to make choices, what choices are you going to choose? And that doesn't mean you're going to do it perfectly. Like,
right, exactly.
you know, there's going to be lots of shit still in that shadow, even after like years. Cause like, how long has your healing journey been? You said,
probably 10 years.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm about the same. And like, I got to tell you, the first 5 years, like, it was devout in that I was searching, but once that 5-year mark hit and I had some foundation, everything sped up because I knew what I was looking for.
Yes.
I knew what I was doing. And like, and even now, like I catch those glimpses of like, I'm healed. Like I know everything about myself. I'm going to catch all of the shadow moments. It's like, no, you're not. And you have to rely heavily into your real friends that tell you the truth and are like, exactly. They're going to call you on your stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, a big part of that too, for me has been when the shadow is there, like when the manipulator shows up, because she does, like my little inner manipulator is like very crafty and manipulative. And so there is this idea of like, oh, I need to cast that away. I need to not be that way. And just like you try to shove it out of your psyche. Like, I don't want that. And so what has been so important and healing to me is to be able to recognize it, or whenever I do recognize it, make space and love that part of me. Like I mean, you know, we all develop things for certain reasons, but it's like seeing the little girl that only got things sometimes because she manipulated, and like picking her up and loving her and just saying, I got you. Like, you don't have to go to him. Like, you don't have to get him to see you. Like, I see you, and I'm going to rock you, and I'm going to love you, and I'm going to take care of you. So it's not pushing anything out. It's loving it into wholeness, like integrating that little manipulator and all the shadow selves, all those unintegrated parts of ourselves, loving them into wholeness.
All the little ghost children.
Oh my goodness. Like, oh, yes.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think, and I want to hear your perspective on this, because as someone who is raised fundamentalist Christian, and like I'm from New Jersey, so we have religion obviously up north, but my family was Roman Catholic, but I learned this term down here. I don't know if it's PC or anything, but it's Creaster. So like the people that only go to church on Christmas and Easter. So we were those. And now no one goes. I'll go to church occasionally. I do enjoy the experience of picking up the energy of the room and letting it carry me off into the ethers. Yes. And that's certainly not every church, or limited to church. But I think it's important to recognize the ghost children for what they are, and recognize those manipulative tendencies as an attempt to meet your own needs. Right. Instead of pushing it away, I think that the further you push away one of your little ghost children, the more it develops into the Leviathan and that huge demon that's so consuming, and like now you're blind to it. You can't see anything. And it grows out of control. And the simple remedy is to take the flashlight and to go into the dark. I think one of the interesting things about some churchianity right now is run away from the demon because the demon is bad, instead of get to know your opponent, so that you know what you're working with. And if you get to know that opponent just the way, you know, a football team watches recorded videos of their opponent's quarterback, and they try to learn their plays, the more you know about what you're facing, the better you're going to be at defeating it. Do you need to defeat a ghost child? No. All you need to do is meet the need. And you can do that manipulatively, or you can just ask outright as you shed the light of consciousness on it.
And in coaching, like one of the tools that I use is to have my clients, you know, like kind of personify these parts of themselves, like as we're doing a process of meditation and visualization. And then I have them like ask this shadow piece, like, what do they need? Almost 100% of the time, it's just love. Like it's just love. And so, yeah, it's funny you said creaster. That's hilarious. So and I haven't heard that term because I try to explain to people like the special brand of fundamentalist that I was raised in, and I have absolutely no negative feelings about that anymore. I did for a while, but it was so intense that we had this term SMO, and that was Sunday morning only. So if you're a Sunday morning only and you don't go to the midweek service, you're not really the real kind of Christian.
Yeah.
So it was like that intense. So yeah. And it's so funny because there was also some like deep spirituality inside of it. And so I'm like reconnecting with that. And if you're watching this and you're like, she's anti-Christian, I'm actually really not. I have so much love for the stories in scripture. I actually plan to write a book about one of them. I'm working on that little idea right now. But yes, it's all about loving the shadows. And one of the things that I discovered within myself, so I had this fear that I had, it was something like in my specific denomination, they would call a Jezebel Spirit. And so like I was raised in a very charismatic, fundamentalist, charismatic type movement that was like speaking in tongues and running around the church and like dancing and shaking and all of that. So you can see why I can still find a lot of like, I remember going to my first embodiment retreat and I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm at church. And at first I was super triggered, but then I was like, oh, like this is not a bad thing. Like, and now I'm like, I'm shaking and speaking in tongues and doing all the things, just not like in a religious type setting. And so where was I going with that? Yeah, so there was a lot of good within that. It was just that it was kind of also heaped, like kind of like a rules-based type performance.
Mm-hmm.
That has been another big thing. And maybe that was like to get me to the segue of a huge part of my personal sexual, because I'm looking at like your questions and it's like triggering thoughts in me.
Spread them out.
Yeah. So like a huge part of my personal healing has been to completely recognize and really, I was talking about Jezebel, but let me finish this thought and then I'll go back to that. To recognize the part of myself that wants to perform and to look at that from a sexual place and like, oh, wow, I actually am trying to get in these positions and make sure my belly's just right and all of that. And to be able to say like, no, that's not what this is about. Like this is about connection and healing and transformation and creativity. So that has been, and so then to look at the rest of my life and say, where else am I being performative? And that's not what any of life is about, unless you are a performer in your own stage. And yes, perform away.
Yeah, that's fun too.
Yes.
It's certainly allowed.
Yes. And like that performance, like is for performing, but life is not for performing. But the Jezebel piece. So I was raised with this fear of having a Jezebel spirit, which means like being slutty or manipulative and all of these things. And it like, I lost many nights of sleep over this fear because I was kind of hypersexual. And so a huge part of my healing was actually in a process I was in, like someone brought me into a deep visualization meditation. And that was what came up, was like my inner Jezebel. And it was so funny because the person that was working with me was like, what part of you can find love for the Jezebel within you? And so as I tapped in, it was like the church lady, like the inner church lady, the buttoned up, like little perfect church lady. And I just had this inner visual of the church lady and the Jezebel becoming best friends and helping each other like balance out to where they both can be there. Like they both belong. Like, yes, there's times when I get like off, I get too rigid and I get too churchy and I get too this or that. And then there's times when I'm like just a wild woman and I want to like manipulate and like have all the sex and be crazy. So it's like recognizing like, yes, all of that's in there and it's in all of us. Like that's the nature of like archetypes and stuff. It's like, we all have it all. It's about what do we intentionally and consciously want to tap into.
Right. So one of the areas that I tend to judge, one of the areas that I'm still healing it. And so I tend to judge when women are still working towards leaving an abuser, which is not a great place for me as someone who's trauma informed. I need to be a little bit cautious about which clients I take. And if it's not a match because I can't be in my best energy, then I always refer out.
Yeah.
But that is an area for me that's still under construction, where I'm still taking the steps to accept my experience, to accept the damage that I allowed to be done to me. And so I think that it's important to just be aware of the things of yourself that you haven't accepted, or if they're in the shadow, you wouldn't know. You have to look at the mirrors. The people around you are mirroring back, and we get clues about what's hidden in the shadow based on our judgments and what shows up in them. So when I catch my judgment, I get the opportunity to say, oh, there's some stuff in there that still needs to be addressed. Someone shared with me about a woman who was trying to leave an abuser, and I had so much anger come up in me, and it shouldn't be directed at her. That's my anger for the version of me that struggled for 5 years to leave a marriage that was not slowly going downhill.
Right.
It bottomed out month 9 and got progressively worse. And I knew that the trust would never be rebuilt after that. And so a part of it is learning to grieve, fully grieve what happened, and say, yeah, that did happen. There's no reverse button. You can't click the controller and go back in time and make it any different. It did happen. What do I need in my grieving process to make all of those emotions okay, so that I can come into that full acceptance? And I think full acceptance is very close, if not overlapping, with forgiveness. And that becomes the point where I'm able to work with the women that are trying to leave without adding my own mental energies into what they're doing, clouding their stuff that's happening.
Yeah. That's so good. So here's a thought that came to me during that, was that, and a big part of the coaching that I love is finding where the trauma is stored in your body. And like, which I think like pole dancing and any kind of movement is going to help tap into that and be able to move the energy of that. But just recognizing that any trauma we experience, no matter how big or small, it's in our body. Like, and in my mind, and I don't know if this is like scientifically correct, but my brain works in very strange ways. But this has been super helpful for me, is that when I think about, our brain, the prefrontal cortex, front brain, it's what makes us more evolved than other beings, versus our primal brain, our subconscious. I learned this back in mindset coaching, but what, like, the visual that came through for me is imagining that, or the reality that our nerves kind of come from that primal brain stem down through the spine, throughout our whole body. And so when I say that the trauma is stored in your body, that means your body is your subconscious. So the trauma is stored in your subconscious. Well, the way to find that usually is through the body. I mean, I was at a retreat 2 weeks ago, and I was having this process where I was receiving like kind of deep tissue massage, and they hit a spot in my calf that triggered a memory that like, and I was in a safe place. I mean, it was for this type of work, that I like just started weeping and just started processing this trauma. And I'm like just beating pillows, and it was super intense. And when it was over, it was like, oh wow, a layer just came off of that. And so like allowing ourselves to use the body as a portal for healing those things. And yeah, it's so good. And I find that anytime I dance or do like some really like deep breath work or any of that kind of stuff, little things will pop up, like little thoughts. It's like, it doesn't have to be massage. Like it can literally just be body movement, but you're paying attention. So it's almost like a meditation that you're listening. What is the body telling me? And then we'll have these random thoughts, but we just dismiss them because we are like not used to being conscious about them. So I know expanded consciousness is something we were going to look at, but that's how to expand consciousness, is to make the subconscious conscious. Well, the only way for that to happen is allow the memories to come up. And they usually come up through like body movement, body work.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple things. I love that you said a layer of the trauma peeled off, because although it's totally possible, the Bible talks about St. Paul, who I do not trust. I know his role in like the Italian Christians and like who he, our deity that shifted onto him. But most people don't become enlightened overnight or in a week span.
Yeah.
It's kind of like if someone were to write something onto your palm and you'd lick your finger and like you'd rub it off, but like you'd still be able to see it. I think the healing process is similar in that you might have large chunks of it peel off, but that integration takes time.
Yes.
And then, what were you just talking about? Oh, it was so good.
Just healing through the body.
Healing through the body. Yes. Thank you. So I'm a yoga therapist. You also teach yoga. Have you gotten people into pigeon pose and like just watch them like weep or get like super fucking pissed off?
Yeah. And I find that, and even for me, when I first started practicing it, I just wanted to leave it. Like, just get me out of this pose. I mean, so much trauma in the hips. And so now when I teach, that is something I always say, like, we store a lot of trauma in our hips. So if this makes you uncomfortable, just try to like soften. Just try to soften into it. And so I'm really glad that I am, trauma informed, because honestly, I think every yoga teacher needs some type of trauma informed, or even like workout teachers. Like everybody needs to at least take a little bit of trauma informed training.
Which is so convenient because I happen to teach that.
And I genuinely was not thinking about that when I said that, but legitimately, like I actually took a training years ago. But it needs to be. I think every minister, every obviously counselors are, but like anyone that is bringing people into like a spiritual or a physical practice could use trauma informed.
Absolutely. and it makes sense that we store traumas in the body, because whether you're swerving to avoid a fender bender or someone's actively coming at you and you're going to hopefully block yourself. Or like my siblings used to jump out of the closets. It was like the worst game ever. But like you go like this and you go to protect yourself, and your chest contracts, but these muscles are working all day long. Every time we walk, these are much stronger, these psoas muscles, and they got to protect all this good viscera that's down here that I need if I'm going to continue life. So tons of shit gets stored in the body, and it does leak out. I do want to point out she's settled in now, but we talked about our little ghost children and suppressing needs and suppressing that inner manipulator and thinking that it's bad. But she's settled for the moment. But it just goes to show you that if you ignore something, if that need's going to go chronically unmet, it will continue to grow, just as the dog Rizzo would hang out with us, and then if we ignored her, she'd come back, and she'd come back with a squeaker, and she'd come back in your face. So I did want to highlight that. And I also wanted to share something that one of my teachers, who is Green Craft Wicca, So this person identifies as both Wicca and witch. And perhaps one of the most valuable pieces of information and perspective I got with regard to your inner spiritual journey is to look within yourself. And so he talks about orthodoxy, the teachings of the church or whatever the dogma is, versus orthopraxy, and going internally to access your own divinity and your own divine connection.
Right.
So it doesn't just stop here with whatever I'm able to do and manifest right at this moment, but like that part of me that connects to God, goddess, the universe, whatever.
Right.
And I think that that is the only important thing that matters. If you're able to go through your own divine channel, that's going to be much more effective and much more worth your while than going into the church, handing your key to the divine, to the minister, and like, hopefully they unlock the door. Yeah. Hopefully they know how to get the key into the lock.
Right.
Because it's not true. Not everyone has had a depth of experience. It's you can know a lot. You can have a lot of theory and a lot of training and have read a lot of books,
right?
But that doesn't guarantee a personal experience of peace and joy and love, the kind that you never forget,
right?
And have that pathway then to grow in and go back to.
Yeah.
I want to tell you about my first exorcism as well.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, we all have that key. And I think it's important to unlock the door yourself, because handing off your key, there's no guarantee that someone's going to unlock it for you.
Yeah. Before you talk about your exorcism experience, I'll just say this real quick because I'll probably forget when you get done. But this is, kind of something that came to me. One of the reasons that I like to work in person is because I like to work local. I think that the South, I know Baton Rouge area, there is so much religious conditioning and just really strong religious strongholds is what I would call it here. So I'm passionate about that. And it's been a really interesting, I was doing women's ministry at one point. Like I was very, very, very involved in the church and not that long ago. And I don't feel completely removed from that. I actually feel I'm in a place where I feel very connected to that in certain ways. It's fascinating. But even when you said that, like my friend who's Wicca and identifies as a witch, there's a part of my heart that's like, oh my God, that makes me so nervous. And what I've come to realize within myself, there's a primal fear in those words because that doesn't belong here, And so what it makes me think about, though, is that Christianity has had this, and I love that you use churchianity because there's a difference in true Christianity and churchianity, which would be the religion. But dogma is what people are attached to and are really afraid of letting it go. And I told someone recently that is entertaining going to a retreat with me. And they were like, that sounds really weird. And I was like, if you're attached to dogma, then don't come. But if you're attached to God and to Jesus, totally come, because actually they aren't about the dogma. We are. We like it because it makes us feel safe. But with that in mind, as someone who still feels very connected to true Christianity, I've realized that, yes, we can very much just appropriate things like in yoga. I've struggled with this idea. Well, I did Christian yoga training. That feels very appropriated to me now. But like I said, it was kind of the pathway for me. And for me to come to a place of saying, okay, because what I was taught is that yoga predates religion. And so that it's not really connected to any tradition. And it is. That's just BS. Give me a break. It just drives me nuts.
Just free floats.
Yeah.
In the ethers.
Yes, exactly. And so, if yoga is connected to Hinduism, if I'm Christian and I practice yoga, am I going to become Hindu? No. It's about intention and like what you're focusing on. And it's so sad that Christianity and Christians cannot say, well, the Hindus gave us this, and we are so deeply like, it just brings tears because I'm so deeply, like, I just cherish it. That's so sacred to me. And I respect and honor that so deeply. And so, like, yeah, I have like lots of friends that identify as witches. And I'm like, ah. And I'm coming to realize, like, as I've kind of gotten a grip on what they're actually talking about, I'm like, oh, that's that. Like, there's so much to be learned. And it is about embodying. And it's actually like Jesus, whenever Jesus gave the bread and the wine, he was saying, we've turned it into this religious, like, do this in remembrance of me. And like, it's this rote little, ritual that doesn't have a ton of meaning for some people. I think for Catholics, it has more than it does for a lot of Protestants.
We're all just reformed witches anyway. Catholicism.
Yeah. So for me now, it's to say, like, when Jesus said, here, eat my body, he was saying, embody me.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
embody his energy, embody the Christ consciousness.
Yes. And that was like, if you study long enough, you're eventually going to come to this place. Like Jesus was saying, I am the way. Like, Christ consciousness is the way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the most incredible thing. So yes, if you are like all about the dogma, I'm probably not the person for you because I will mess you up. But if you are about embodying Christ consciousness and being truly connected to God in an experiential way, then yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm here for it.
Yeah. I mean, what else is there other than the experience?
Yeah.
I had a young man. I was at a church function. It was in the beginning of coronavirus quarantining, and we were handing out food, and I was talking about yoga therapy, and he goes, yoga is from the devil. I'm like, he's like, you can stretch, but if you do yoga, it's a different God, or whatever he was saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, it's not like, if I bend down and touch my toes, that's not any different from like folding forward. Like, it's not, if you go a little bit further, it's Krishna, but like, if you don't go quite as deep, it's still Jesus. Like, that's insane.
I know.
And it's the same kind of thing where it's like, you can do a really beautiful ritual, and like, if your ritual is in devotion to Christ, the Christ consciousness, or God, or Jesus, like, it doesn't, doing a ritual doesn't automatically mean that you're doing the ritual to Baphomet or to, which is like totally a misunderstood kind of deity. But like, I work only with Christ, and the God goddess head as I understand it. But like,
that's why we love each other.
Yeah, doing a ritual doesn't mean that it's like, haha, your intention is hijacked, like no.
Well, and so another thing that came to me, and whenever I need to shut up, I don't know how long this is supposed to be.
Well, we have 18% battery life.
Okay.
So we have within 10 minutes.
Okay. So one little thing that shifted my whole universe was to recognize that I had spent my entire life viewing God as the man upstairs, like this being outside of, like, up and out, and Christ as like Jesus's son sitting on the throne beside God, and like they're over there. And to shift that from being, oh, God's down and in, like, that's the whole symbolism of asking Jesus into your heart. That's what that means. Like, it's down and in. And so I think in Christianity, we take these things to be like literal. And I'm like, do you think little Jesus lives in your little heart? Like, literally?
He can come down and in, and then he can come all the way down here, and you can root that learning onto the earth.
Yeah. So, and it like, God's up and out, because the God center is nowhere. Like, or God's center is everywhere and his circumference is nowhere. Like, we are just soaked in divinity. Like, oh my God. And when people say things like, oh, if you do yoga, you're going to get a demon. Well, my response to that is, if the God you serve is that small and that afraid, like, I don't want to say then to that if, but like, come on.
Be aware of the limitations that you place on the omnipotent.
Because basically we're living in fear, and perfect love casts out fear. I mean, like, love, God is love. Like, press into love, press away from fear, and watch your life literally explode in goodness. That's all I can tell you.
I want to share baby's first exorcism while we still have some life on the battery.
Okay.
So this was shortly after the major trauma in my marriage. And sorry for being evasive, but it's, it crosses my boundary of vulnerability of what I want to share. Yeah. And my ex and I were in a panic. We're like, oh my God, you're going to get deported. I'm going to have to go with you. Like, our whole lives are going to just unravel. And we walked into a church, and I have like my Dasani bottle, and I'm like, we're going to get holy water and we're going to bless the whole house.
I love it.
And so I run into this church with my crumpled up bottle from like the floor of my car. I go to fill it up in the baptismal font, and a priest walks over to us. I assume all church officials are priests. I know they're not, but I don't know what denomination this church was. Something with a baptismal font. And he comes over and he goes, our church is closed. And I burst into tears. Like, all of it just comes out. And where it was like this kind of anxiety before, like now it's starting to release. And I'm like, we're being threatened. And he takes the palm of his hand and he places it onto my forehead here. And I don't know what he was saying. I don't know what prayer it was, but he prayed over me. And as if it were standing under a waterfall, all of that fear was washed out of me. And I've never felt peace like that ever. And that became my pathway of like, now I have a template. Now I have like a stencil of how to get there.
Yeah.
And so that was my first exorcism. And I'm so grateful for it, because we're all walking around with our demons all day long. And we can address them and turn in and meet the need. For me, it was, I needed to be held, and like, I needed someone to let me know that it was all going to be okay.
I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so good.
So that was my first exorcism. And that was also my map, my working map. Back to God.
Yeah. And like you saying that, kind of thinking of the whole idea of like, God is down and in, Christ is down and in. Well, we have this idea also that like these demons are like little munchkins outside of us trying to attack us. And when we start to recognize, oh, wait, that's in me. Like that's, those things are things I need to deal with within myself. I don't need to like block them. Like,
and it's not a demon. It's an unmet need. It's a child.
Yes, exactly. To really, and I mean, it's not that I don't think there's evil in the world. Obviously there is. And one thing like my theology has come to is basically I have a theology of I don't know. Like my mom asked me recently, she was like, you mean you don't believe in the devil? And I was like, yes, I do. Because it was like really disruptive to her, the idea. But the reality is like, I don't know. I don't know what that means. I don't know. Like there are some things that are above my pay grade and everyone else's.
Yep.
You know? And so like, I've come to realize if you want to be a spiritual teacher for me, you better be able to own your I don't know. Because if you have it figured out, then I'm scared to death of you.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. No space for megalomania. Like, one of the ends of the spectrum is neuroticism of I don't know anything at all.
Right.
And the other end is the psychotic aspect of like, I know everything. And it's like, we're going to hopefully land somewhere in the middle.
Yes.
And with regard to being humble and acknowledging what you don't know, it's, you don't need to know nothing, but
yeah. And so
There's space to grow.
So one thing I used to love about church, the last church that I was part of, is that at the end of the sermon, they would give practical tips. My husband loved that so much because it was like before we were part of that, like you heard a sermon, you really had no clue when you left. We're like, what am I supposed to do with this kind of thing? So it's actually something we've adopted into our life. Like, what's the practical tip for this? So let's talk practical tips from this.
All right. Do you want to give tips to me or me to you or tips to ourselves?
Let's do, let's just see what comes. Okay. Like I'll give one and you give one and you just kind of see like what's coming to me as far as a practical tip as a sex coach to the ethers, like whoever feels called to it. Allow your sexuality to be a place where you become vulnerable and really, really honest.
My practical tip is going to be to seek out yourself as your own safe haven.
Yes.
And with time, you will find people that mirror that safe haven external to you. It's not a guarantee that they're all presently there in your life right now.
Yes.
But you will get there.
Yes, you definitely will. It's all about intention and just stepping, like being willing to be a beginner, step on the path of growth and like trust your next yes.
Oh, that feels good. And our computer's still alive. Give me a giant hug.
Oh, I love it.
Oh my goodness, she's ready to play. I know. We didn't pay attention to you. Mwah. All right. Thank you. End stream. Your stream will stop. All right. Yes, end.